I think carrying the same pattern over and over again will create chronic pain. So, um, let's go into just fight or flight mode. Okay. People
Mm,
know this, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. So, how one person decides to live stress and then how they hold on to that stress over time will create something chronic or painful. So I'm trying to think something chronic that comes into the office. I see a lot of arthritis,
mhm,
actually. It's a big one that I see. And people go, Ann, what do I need to do to get rid of my arthritis? And it's like, well, I think the big question is, what have you been doing? Okay.
mm,
So getting a screenshot, a little snapshot of their life. So let's take, a client that I have in my head at the moment, beautiful man. He goes, oh, yeah, I said, well, what do you eat for lunch? Peanut butter sandwich every day for his whole life. A peanut butter sandwich. Now, just let's think about what that peanut butter sandwich might be doing over a long period of time, right? Is it going to be nurturing his body? Oh, and I'm going to say on white bread as well. That's what
mm.
it is. Peanut butter sandwich on white bread. And I'm not knocking peanut butter sandwiches, but it's something I wouldn't choose to nurture my body. And so, over time, I would say, okay, let's say, how many peanut butter sandwiches have you had? And he's like, oh, like hundreds, hundreds. And I said, well, do you think that's a food, for example, that could be exchanged out for something new? So we draw awareness to the patterns that he was living. He goes, well, I could give something else a try. And I said, well, let's, get you some protein, first of all, right?
Mm,
And get you some protein to decrease some inflammation. So there's, a step one right there of one pattern out of many that can be exchanged, right?
mm,
And then, so we start to exchange out those patterns. But then, we dove into, his deep, deep arthritis. And interestingly enough, as a child, he had a very difficult childhood, extremely difficult. And he started to create some, autoimmune issues as a kid. He said, well, I started to have stiff joints as a kid. And I said, well, why? And he goes, gosh, every time I get hit by my dad, I would just kind of freeze up and I couldn't quite loosen myself up. And so what we did is I still worked on him. We worked on the joints, we worked on the nutrition, which was creating pain. Okay. But then we also had to couple it with revisiting his childhood experiences of being abused. Okay. And by the way, the arthritis was in the back of his hip. Okay. And he'd usually get hit there. Okay. A lot of kids get spanked, right? And so he was living that moment. And it was really interesting because the method that I used with him in the office was I said, okay, as I'm working on this area, tell me what's coming up for you. And tears, started coming out. All the energy that he'd been carrying for so long
mm.
started coming out of his body because he's like, wow, I can't believe that my body has been hanging on to those moments of my childhood, and creating this stiffness in me throughout everything. And that I was really choosing to live that. And so we work on the joint, but then we also want to actually exchange out consciously, like you were saying, the emotion of what he was feeling. So then we had to go back and replace like the sadness. I think he had some fear. I can't remember quite all the words that he was using, but it's definitely sadness and fear and probably feeling a bit diminished in a way. And so we wanted to recreate that in him with empowerment, with standing like in his own sovereignty because he didn't need to, look at his father as authoritative figure anymore, which, he had problems with authority going through life, right? Based on that model
Mm,
as a child, which I think is a great story for 2020 as well. But,
mm.
so, how he viewed authority and lived it out is exactly, what he was creating in his life over and over again.
Thanks for watching this video, and you can find the full-length podcast episode here on this channel, or you can head over to Apple Podcast or Spotify, and don't forget to like this video.